Coming to paperback and Kindle Unlimited, Isis, All That Glitters. The goddess next door takes on a bikini-clad bank robber in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, All That Glitters in paperback and Kindle Unlimited this March. In a live stream, I was asked if I had an opportunity to bring my characters to a mainstream media platform like Warner Brothers or Disney, would I do it? And the answer to that was emphatically no. And the reason why the answer to that was emphatically no is because I know if I took Isis, John Haynes, E-Steam, or any of my other characters to a mainstream media platform, they would make efforts to bury those characters. And the reason why I believe they would bury those characters is based on the history and track record of corporations as related to black superhero characters and black characters in media. And I can point to examples like the character of Monica Rambeau, the Black Captain Marvel. Now, the Black Captain Marvel, when she came out in the early 80s, was an extremely popular character. She had a very solid following, and she was building a reputation in stories, and she was on her way to becoming one of the more popular characters in the 1980s until Marvel Editorial decided to bury the character. And after they decided to bury the character by depowering her, we then saw the character fall into obscurity for a decade and then managed to meander for after that because they just did not really continue to push the character the way they used to push the character. And again, they do that whenever a black character starts to rise in popularity, and that character starts to rise in popularity to the point where they become as popular as the white characters. Because when it comes down to many of these comic book companies and their corporate owners, they don't want people looking at black characters in a positive that come from a positive light and on the same level as their white characters, because they create these media platforms to elevate white people and the image of white people. And the whole idea of a black image being the equal of a white image, that is something that makes many in industries like the comic book industry, the television industry, and the movie industry extremely uncomfortable. So they try to find ways to bury black characters and prevent those characters from getting a huge following or actualizing their potential. Now, when it comes down to this burial process, it's something that is done on the regular, because we can look at characters like your Static and we can see how they buried that character back in the early 2000s. Now, in 2000, I believe fall of 2000, they introduced Static Shock, an animated series based on Dwayne McDuffie's comic book Static. And the network didn't really think that the show was going to be that popular. But to their surprise, Static Shock became the most popular show on the Kids WB and the highest rated show on Kids WB. But what was very interesting about that whole thing was related to Static Shock was all these other shows like Jackie Chan Adventures and many of these other shows that were on at the time, like X-Men Evolution, they all got toy lines from toy companies, and they got licensed for toys almost before the show even came to air. Static Shock was on television for 4 years straight and never got a single offer for a toy line. It never got an action figure line, and it never got anything except maybe one fast food promotion and no sort of licensing or merchandising at all. And again, that has to do with these networks going out of their way to bury this show featuring a black male lead. And the reason why they wanted to bury the show was because they didn't want people seeing an image of a black man that was positive. They didn't want to see the image of a black boy being a hero and a protector to his community. They didn't like the idea of us seeing a black boy having a father in his life and having a boy learning about male authority and male authority figures. and they didn't like the image of actual diversity because we saw Static being in the lead and Gear being the follower, who was a white character, but it was just based on his friend Richie Foley, and they didn't like those narratives in that media, so Static Shock never got any sort of merchandising whatsoever. Even worse, it didn't even get a full DVD release until about 2016. Now, in contrast, Justice League, which came around 2001, I believe, they started producing DVDs around 2004 of the first season, and I think 2005 in the second season. And Batman Beyond, which left in 2001, started getting DVDs in about 2004, because I bought the DVDs back then of season 1, and I got season 2 I think about 2005. So they got DVDs within about 2 to 3 years, but Static Shock, which left in 2004, we had to wait all the way till 2016, and those DVDs only came out after a lot of fan outcry from bloggers like myself who were writing blogs saying that there was some sort of Static Shock conspiracy because this show ended in 2004. It was a top-rated show, and usually networks want to make money off a top-rated show, but this show wound up getting completely buried, and this show was not seen for years. Usually, in order to get Static Shock, you had to buy bootlegs at a Comic-Con, and again, I believe that's because these networks, again, they don't like the idea of promoting a positive image of black heroes, and they don't like promoting those images on their media platforms because they design their media platforms for white images, and they're designed to elevate white images. Now, when it comes down to this pattern I'm starting to see, they not only bury the characters by making it where you can't find them, they also bury characters by changing them in their adaptations. And an example of that is what they did with the DC superhero Mr. Terrific. Now, Mr. Terrific in the comic books of the Justice Society of America, which were done by Jeff Johns, it changed from Terry Sloan, a white man, to Michael Holt, a black man. And the Michael Holt, Mr. Terrific, was one of those characters that has been praised by white comic fans and black comic fans and comic fans all across. He's been well accepted, and he is considered to be a respected character. In fact, many people respect him because in the comics, he is the world's third smartest man, and he's an extremely formidable opponent on the level of Batman and could be considered the equivalent of Marvel's Black Panther. Now, the Mr. Terrific in the comics is one that everybody respects and everybody loves, but when it came time to adapt him for the CW's Arrow, they found ways to bury the character by presenting him in a way that would make him appear to be unappealing. And the way they made him to be unappealing was to, one, make him a homosexual, and then two, make him to be a bumbling, stumbling idiot so that he would not make the Oliver Queen character appear to be less than. Because when it comes down to Mr. Terrific, they wanted him to be a follower character, when in actuality in the comics, Mr. Terrific could destroy Green Arrow in a fight. And what they did with the character was they downgraded him, and that's how they buried him, because they did not want him to appear to be the credible threat that he actually was in the comics. And they didn't bring that to the screen because they wanted to bury the black character so the white character could appear to be superior in every way, shape, or form. Now, when it comes down to these black characters, again, they find ways to bury them. They find ways to keep them from increasing in popularity. And that could also be seen in Captain America Civil War, where we see the War Machine character. So the War Machine character, again, another character who's having a following in the film, they make it where James Rhodes winds up getting paralyzed. And again, this is a way of making the black character appear to be secondary so that they cannot rise to the level of becoming as popular as the primary character. So whenever I see this going on, I say to myself, these black characters all the time, they're always getting buried and they never allowed to really rise to that level of where they can get to mainstream popularity. And I could see that also with Netflix's Luke Cage. Now, Netflix's Luke Cage, when it first came on the air, your Netflix's Luke Cage was so popular it literally crashed Netflix's servers. And the second season, I believe, was equally popular. But then we get this story invented that, the ratings for the show dropped. But I find it interesting that so many people online were talking about the second season and praising it. And they were praising it because it presented you with this balanced image of black masculinity, this net positive image of black manhood, and presented you with an image of black males taking the lead in their community, and presented you a positive image of black manhood. But they had to cancel the series, I believe, not because of some so-called ratings issue, but because the narrative did not fit what Netflix and Disney wanted as related to the black image. Because when it comes down to, again, these media platforms, they're all about elevating white men and white women, and they don't like the idea of elevating a black man or a black woman to a higher level above them. They don't want to spend resources on platforms they create to elevate themselves, to elevate others. So that's why these black characters get buried on the regular. So whenever I look at this mainstream media, I know that there is no way I could take a character that I create who is black and bring them to a mainstream platform. Because if I were to take a character like a John Haynes, like an Isis, like an Easteen, or Matilda Crowley, or even a Nikki Desmond, and bring them to mainstream media, if they started to become extremely popular, I know what would happen is that those media platforms would make efforts to try to bury those characters. And once they bought those characters, because once you sign the rights away to one of these media platforms, what they do is they own the rights to your characters in that medium. So if you sign away the film and television rights, they own your character's film and television rights, and they can adapt that character to become whatever they want it to be. And they can literally either change that character's story, or in some cases just buy that character's story and then bury that character so that character won't compete with their white male characters or their white female characters. Or they will take the character in, if they do an adaptation, find some way to degrade that character or bring that character down in some way, shape, or form. They will find some way to take a character who is strong and masculine like John Haynes, and they would turn him into a bumbling, stumbling idiot, or they would try to find some way to make the character effeminized, or they would find some way to present him in a way that makes him appear less than, or they would try to introduce some sort of white character in the stories. Or if in the case of an Isis, they would start introducing these ghetto traits like baby mamas and hood rats and things like that. And again, find ways to, as they call it, urbanize the characters and make the characters appear to be less than the white women that they present in media, instead of trying to present them as balanced and humanized. So what they would do is take a black character from a black creator and then take that character and make it fit the narrative for their media platform. And that's what these social justice warriors and these liberals like to do on their media platforms. They want to make the character what they want the character to be, and they want to tell stories that breathe brand new life into old stereotypes, instead of presenting you with balanced human types like we saw in shows like Static Shock or shows like Luke Cage, or with characters like Monica Rambeau, a character that came from two parents in the comic books, but in the movie is supposed to be coming from a single mother. That shows us again how they find ways to make these characters appear to be less than their white counterparts and make them appear to be inferior to their white counterparts, so that people will not see them on the same level as black characters. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that as the publisher of the SJS Direct imprint, why it's important for me to remain independent and have my own platform is because the only way I can elevate the image of the black man and the black woman is to have my own platform, because that platform will allow me to present those positive, balanced, and humanized images of black people, those diverse images of black people, like I do with the Spinsterella books, which show you African Americans in the goth subculture, and show you a picture of black that is outside of the mainstream. Because when it comes down to the mainstream, all they want to do is see black people in the black box that white people find acceptable, and inside of that box, it's very limited, and all we see are only a handful of caricaturized images like your natural-haired pro-black sister, or your boho, or your thug, or your street dude, but we don't get to see all of the black people who do not fit within these stereotype narratives created on these mainstream platforms. And if you start trying to go outside of those boxes, like Static did, like Monica Rambeau did, like Mr. Terrific did, and Jon Stewart did as the Green Lantern, what they do is they cut those characters off, they bury those characters, and they make sure you don't see those characters, because if you were to see those characters, what you're going to do is become inspired by those characters. You're going to start getting ideas from those characters, and you're going to start aspiring to live a different life out of what the mainstream media subscribes for black people to live inside of that black box that they consider acceptable to white people, and the lifestyles they consider to be acceptable for black people to live. Because once you start showing these unique and diverse images like I do on the SJS Direct Publishing platform, you start seeing, oh, I can be a goth, or I can be a comic book fan, or I can be into sci-fi and fantasy, or I can see Egyptian and Nubian gods as black people, or I can see a black man as a CEO that is so powerful that he has influence all over the world, and I can see black people in images and ideas that run counter to the norm, and I can see this as something that I aspire to be like, and something that I could possibly do in my own life, because media is incredibly influential, and when you imbibe healthy media, it gives you inspiration to go out here and see yourself as someone who can do more, and see yourself as someone who can actualize their potential. Because once you start reading positive stories like the ones I produce in the SJS Direct imprint, your whole imagination opens up, and you start imagining yourself in a world that is bigger than the ghetto that mainstream media likes to box black people in, and you start seeing a world where there is a place for you in it. And that's one of the reasons why I want to keep the SJS Direct platform independent, is because I want black people, to imagine themselves as things like CEOs, imagine themselves as sorority members, imagine themselves as goths, and imagine themselves as being heroes to their own communities, and heroes who can go out and do things like save the world, like John Haynes did in The Man Who Rules the World, and Eastine did in Eastine, The Sands of Time. I want you to be able to see a world where there's people that are black, and that there is a place for black people in the world. And I believe that corporations like Warner Brothers, or Disney, or Comcast, or Viacom, these are corporations would not allow me an opportunity to tell those type of stories on their platforms, because on their platforms they're going to go out of their way to elevate only white images and tell white stories, and they're not going to make any efforts to try to elevate any sort of black character, because with every efforts to go out here and elevate a black character, whether it be a Captain Marvel, a Blade, a Steel, or any other, they seem to always, when the character starts to become popular with mainstream audiences, find ways to bury them and prevent them from getting over. And whenever those characters start to threaten the popularity base of a white character, they seem to find some way to make those characters disappear from any sort of media platform. So I see a pattern as related to the black image on white platforms, and that's why I believe I need to have my own platform, because only on your own platform can you tell positive stories about black people. Only on black platforms can you tell stories about the black experience from a black perspective, and only on black owned platforms can we get balanced and humanized images of black people and get stories about black people from a balanced perspective. Because when it comes down to these mainstream platforms, there's clearly a pattern where we're seeing these characters who are black getting buried on the regular and never getting the opportunity to enter the marketplace and become cultural icons like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, or even get the licensing and merchandising that these characters do in action figures or movie deals or TV deals. With Luke Cage, where we see this show just literally getting canceled before it starts to really actualize its potential. And I believe the only way you can do that to actualize these characters' potential is on a black-owned platform, and that's the core reason why I'd rather build my own platform than sell a license to a company like a Disney or a Time Warner to produce content for me. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, The Temptation of John Haynes, or the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. And if you want to help me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.